Hi and welcome to Terry Talks Movies. This time around I've got a couple of comfort horror films for us. For Science Fiction Saturday I'm stretching the definition of science fiction to include horror and fantasy and other things like that because I can. Comfort horror movies seem to be becoming a theme for the month of October, and it's kind of fun, though on Monday I'm going to be reviewing Terrifier 3, which is not for the faint of heart, but leaving that aside, I've got two movies which are a movie and its sequel, though the sequel does change some details in a way that's not entirely kind of lore consistent with the first movie. They're both made by HBO in the early 1990s, and the first one, of course, is Cast a Deadly Spell, starring Fred Ward, Julianne Moore, Clancy Brown, and David Warner. And the second one is the demi-sequel to it, from 1994, directed by Paul Schrader of all people, and that is Witch Hunt, starring Dennis Hopper, Penelope Ann Miller, and the wonderful Eric Bogosian. So we're going to get started with Cast a Deadly Spell. This one did crazy well in Australia on VHS. It was constantly rented, by me in particular, from video stores at the time, and I tried looking for a DVD of it, and the only one I could find is a Mexican DVD of it, which is widescreen, funnily enough, even though every other copy of the movie I'd ever seen was in 3:2 aspect ratio. This copy is widescreen. It's 16:9. And it's pretty good. The transfer is great. The cinematography really pops when you get a decent copy of the movie. I'm incredibly lucky and glad that I got this one, which I don't know whether it's been released anywhere else on Blu-ray, but it's definitely been released in Mexico. And yeah, as you can see, it's got the Mexican title right there for you. So, what's the movie about? It's set in an alternative 1948 where magic is in the world, and everybody uses magic except one person, a private eye called Philip Lovecraft, and yes, the name obviously says it all, played by Fred Ward, who runs out of a rundown office. He's having trouble paying his rent to his landlady, a witch called Hippolyta Kropotkin, played by Anisha Walker in the first movie and Cheryl Lee Ralph in the second movie, who also runs a dance studio, because you've got to have a side hustle. Phil doesn't use magic in the first movie. The reason he does use magic is he thinks it's easy, he thinks it's lazy, he thinks it's a little too dangerous, so he doesn't use magic. He gets approached by Amos Hackshaw, played by David Warner, to find a book that was stolen from Hackshaw's house, which happens to be the Necronomicon. The evil book from H.P. Lovecraft stories, and Phil Lovecraft, of course, is a reference to H.P. Lovecraft. It's gone missing and it's been stolen by a criminal played by Clancy Brown, a guy called Harry Borden. Phil doesn't know this and he goes to investigate and finds that Harry in his nightclub, which is called the Dunwich Room, again there's a whole bunch of Lovecraftian names in this movie, and there he meets up again with his ex-girlfriend Connie Stone, played by Julianne Moore, who's a nightclub singer there. This is set up as a 1940s detective movie, so you've got those settings. You've got groovy nightclubs, you've got sleazy nightclub owners, you've got a beautiful femme fatale nightclub singer, you've got evil little henchmen who are dangerous, you've got great big henchmen, in this case zombies, and you've got a world that parallels the world we know from a lot of 1940s detective movies, but with that magical twist. We see that really well demonstrated in the nightclub, where there are a whole bunch of things going on in the background which are magic related, and things are starting to get really bad in Los Angeles. There's blood raining from the sky, and people kind of take that in their stride because it's magic. They've got gremlins attacking cars because the gremlins were brought back during World War II from the Pacific Islands and have infested all of the machinery around the place. They've got unicorns as well, and unicorn hunters. And you've got a beautiful bit of world building in this one to give us this weird 1940s milieu. Now, this borrows from a whole bunch of different fantasy novels that preceded it. It was written by a guy called Joseph Doherty and directed by Martin Campbell, the New Zealand-born director who went on to do things like Casino Royale. The special effects work, and the practical special effects work in particular, were done by Alterian Studios. So they've very much got that kind of 80s and 90s B-movie look about them, and I kind of like that. The makeup work and the special effects work in general has very much the same kind of feel as your 1980s Charles Band movies. Fred Ward as Phil Lovecraft is really good. I mean, this is the kind of role that Fred Ward did incredibly well. The charming, rough-looking private eye. He looks really good in a really bad suit and a fedora. He does the dialogue perfectly. And he has that rough Fred Ward charm about him. And him and Julianne Moore play off each other really well. This is a really early role for her. And she nails it completely. She does the femme fatale and the dialogue in a perfect 1940s kind of style, even though it is updated to have a few more racy allusions in the dialogue. And the two of them the chemistry is just great. Clancy Brown, of course, is fantastic as well, playing Borden. David Warner's always fun. He could do the dialogue fantastically. There's a bit at the end where he has to summon the elder gods, which is the whole point of the whole movie. And he summons Yog-Sothoth and Cthulhu and all the rest of them with rolling, beautiful readings of this weird spell that he's casting. And that works really well. Anisha Walker's really good as Kropotkin as well. She does it with a Caribbean accent and gives us a well-rounded character with it. There's also a subplot with a guy called Mickey and his girlfriend Lily, which is kind of interesting and in some ways very inclusive. There's one bit when Lovecraft encounters Lily that's quite off-putting, and I don't think it would be put into a more modern version of this movie. That doesn't sit well with me. I kind of let that one go. You give them one, particularly in an older movie. And the second movie does things a lot more interestingly as far as gender diversity and gender inclusivity without going into too many spoilers. The movie evokes the 1940s world beautifully. The nightclub scenes are great. There's a couple of songs which are lip-synced by Julianne Moore, and the songs are good. They're new songs, but written in a 1940s torch song style. I just love this movie for so many reasons. It's one of the first movies that HBO made for themselves to release on their platform. And it's a shame they didn't do a lot more of this kind of fantasy stuff. There have been urban fantasies done since then, of course. Things like Bright was done on Netflix. But they don't have the grounded world building. The reason this movie works is, we all know 1940s private eye films, and then throwing in the twist of having magic work there and a magical world, and throwing in the old gods from H.P. Lovecraft's work, which has been in the public domain for a very long time. That stuff just works. And because we already know one of the genres, and we know it quite well, and the movie stays true to that genre, it lands the characters, it lands the world, it gives us, even though the special effects towards the end, when the elder gods are being summoned, but something goes slightly wrong, even though that doesn't look as good as it would in a modern movie, because they didn't use computer effects at the time. It was all done with practical effects and on a not terribly large budget. I can kind of forgive that because it does what it does honestly, and the twists and turns at the end work really well. The reason why the elder gods aren't successfully summoned is a lot of fun. It's done with a humorous tone. There is a scene where Phil gets taken to the police station and things are getting weird there. There's a werewolf there. There's a vampire. And so you get this idea that magic is kind of out of control in 1948 Los Angeles, and that the cops are really busy trying to keep up with it. And there's even a bit where there are a bunch of kids casting spells on a car so that its tires blow. All that kind of little bits of business done in the background to basically inhabit the world and make it a fully realised world really works for me. You've got to have a believable world, and you've got to put lots of little details into that world to make it believable. I've seen this movie so many times, and each time I watch it, I love it. I would love to have seen a whole bunch of these movies made with the same character in the same world. I think in a more modern context, say if Netflix had created this in 2024, for a start we would have got much more sophisticated special effects. We wouldn't have had Fred Ward, though I was chatting with somebody online, and hi Nadine, who suggested that somebody like John Bernthal would have been great in this role had it been done in a modern context. And I've got to agree with that. Or even somebody like Dave Bautista would have been a nice Lovecraft in a modern version of this movie. So Cast a Deadly Spell. Look around and see if you can find a copy. I'll post a link to where you can get it on Amazon if it is available in physical media. And I do get a little bit of a kickback from Amazon, which I put into Amazon credits to buy more movies if people buy through that link. So if you've ever seen a link on my show notes for the videos and you're inclined to buy the movie, you can click through that and it helps the channel a little bit. That then brings us to 1994 and the kind of sequel, Witch Hunt, starring Dennis Hopper, Eric Bogosian, Penelope Ann Miller. And it's somewhat different. For a start, it's set in 1953. And Phil Lovecraft's a different character. He does share his offices with Hippolyta Kropotkin, played in this case by Cheryl Lee Ralph. And I don't think she gives the character quite the oomph that Anisha Walker did the first time around. But this Phil is a lot different than the hard-boiled character that we got from Fred Ward. Phil Lovecraft's a little more sophisticated, a little more Dennis Hopper, let's say. And Hopper does okay in this role. The weird thing is it's directed by Paul Schrader, who was kind of in a slump in his career, both as a director and a writer at the time. He was kind of between projects, so he took this gig on. And he does a workmanlike job of directing the movie. It starts out with a weird little newsreel giving the background for the world, where the newsreel narrator is talking about magic. And the movie uses a whole bunch of stock footage from the 1950s to show different magical things. And it gives it very much a weird little feel. I think they may have used some stuff from the Prelinger archive. Lots of industrial films and things like that where magic is used to demonstrate products and services. And so you get a little bit of that there. And you also get an introduction to the main villain of the movie, Senator Crockett, played by Eric Bogosian, who's the kind of Joseph McCarthy character for this, who's gone on a moral panic about witchcraft. He doesn't actually believe it, but he knows it's going to suck in the rubes and it's going to get him into the presidency eventually. And the other big difference is that Lovecraft in this has a reason for not using magic. There's more of a grounded reason why Phil Lovecraft doesn't use magic. There's a tragedy in his past which has affected him, and so he doesn't use magic and take the shortcuts that magic offers. That would have been nice if it was in the first movie, but it wasn't. The unfortunate thing is, even though it is a sequel, those differences make it feel like it's not quite in the same world. We'll let it be what it is. We also got Penelope Ann Miller playing a movie star called Kim Hudson, who's also the wife of one of the studio heads. And she's quite good in it as well. She's charming and beautiful. The other main villain we get is a character called Finn Moxer, played by Julian Sands. And Julian Sands does a nice job. He knows what kind of movie this is, so he plays it slightly humorously, even though he is playing a villain with an evil eye and an Irish accent. I kind of like him in this one. Unfortunately, of course, we know he died on one of the hiking trails near Los Angeles about a year ago. But I like him in this movie. It's a warmer role for Julian Sands than we usually get from him. He's usually a lot darker in his villainy than he is in this one. And we get a lot more of what magic is like in 1950s Hollywood. There's a brothel run by a woman called Vivian Dart, which is in one of Frank Lloyd Wright's houses that he made in Los Angeles, a place called the Millard House, which is one of Frank Lloyd Wright's textile block houses. He built 4 of them in Los Angeles between 1923 and 1924. And it gives it a really weird look. We've seen the textile houses in other movies. House on Haunted Hill is filmed in one of them, for instance. And this brothel is very special because Vivian Dart, played by John Epperson, who, as a drag performer known as Lip Syncer, gets to do a little bit of lip syncing to a Nina Simone version of I Put a Spell on You. Lip Syncer is great, and the movie doesn't reference the gender of the character, and her name is Vivian. We get that kind of gender fluidity, which is kind of novel for 1994. Vivian Dart has magic as a part of her tool set in the brothel. The Johns come in and they tell her what she wants, and she gets one of the girls out and whispers in the girl's ear, and that girl changes physically to match what the client wants. And that's kind of cool. I like that kind of world building. And it makes it feel a little edgier, a little more dangerous. And of course, it does reference the way that women change their appearance for what the men in Hollywood want. So there are some parallels to a lot of this stuff that goes on in Hollywood as far as cosmetic surgery and modification of bodies and the way people look. We get a magic twist on that, which I very much liked. I think it's a good piece of observational world building. There's another scene where Hippolyta Kropotkin is hired by the studio head to bring back from the dead William Shakespeare to be one of the writers for the movie studio. And there's a great scene of Sheryl Lee Ralph enunciating the spell, and we see the words come out of her mouth.
Fair is foul and foul is fair. Hover through the fog and the filthy air.
And it's beautifully evoked. This movie uses computer effects as they were available in 1994, so they don't look great. There's some morphing technology used, for instance, and it's very rudimentary compared to the stuff that came later. But I like the fact that they used it and made it inhabit the world, and even though it does look sketchy from a modern viewpoint, it's still kind of okay. Looking at it at high definition, yeah, you can see the lines around it, you can see the crudeness of it, but I kind of bought into that. I didn't mind that very much because they used what was available, and every time someone used a technology like that in a movie, that encouraged computer-generated imagery to push forward and make itself better. And the people who were writing the software and creating this technology worked to improve based on the fact that they sold to movies like this, if I'm explaining that well. So I'm kind of okay with that. 1994 wasn't incredibly sophisticated with this technology, but they used it to show things that would have been more expensive to show other ways. And there's a nice little arc to Shakespeare coming back as well, where towards the end of the film we see him very much gone Hollywood. So he's wearing a Hawaiian shirt and sunglasses, and he's got a beautiful girl on his arm when he's talking to the studio people. I kind of like that. Yeah, people going Hollywood is another one of those Hollywood things that this movie uses in a magical context. Now, Senator Crockett, played by Eric Bogosian, who's got that wonderful intensity about him. If you haven't seen Talk Radio, it's a movie you should watch. Has a patriot rally. And because new laws have been passed, he's allowed to kill somebody who is proven to be a witch. And in this case, it's Kropotkin. But he also manages to piss off Finn Moxa. And Moxa throws a curse at him. And on stage, he has to reveal his true self. And the way they do that is quite interesting. And the true self that is revealed predicts all the downsides of the next decades after the 1950s. And we get a wonderful little rant from Eric Bogosian, who did this kind of acting really well, where the true self reveals the weird things that are going to happen in the future. I like that. And there is an upshot with Moxa and Lovecraft confronting each other at a beach house, because beach houses, again, are a very much Los Angeles thing. And Kropotkin helps him defeat Moxa. The second one's kind of a lesser film, but I like the fact that both of them exist. The second one I haven't been able to find on DVD yet. It may well be because there's a wonderful scene that takes place at a drive-in movie theatre where they've inserted Penelope Ann Miller as Kim Hudson into The Big Combo. Great classic film noir from 1955, so it's 2 years ahead of its time. The movie's showing on the screen, and somebody casts a spell on the movie. And there's a scene at the end where Richard Conte is trapped in the floodlight attached to the side of a car so that the good guys can find him. He's playing the main crim. And he shoots at the camera. And those shots hit the people in the audience. So they hit the car where Lovecraft and Kim are sitting. So there's a spell that makes what's on the screen real. That's kind of groovy idea. It doesn't last very long, but it works really well. And maybe the reason why this movie hasn't been put out is because of rights issues to do with using The Big Combo. But again, it's that imaginative use of magic and artifacts of the time in the movie that I really enjoyed. So watching these two movies yesterday was a lot of fun, watching them back to back. It worked for me. Yes, there are inconsistencies between the Lovecraft we see in the first movie and the Lovecraft we see in the second movie, which I would have rather were not there. But it's fun, and I would have liked to have seen more of these movies. Unlike a lot of urban fantasy movies that have been made since then, they nail the world building perfectly. Yeah, the special effects may be a little bit ropey, but the world building is chef's kiss good. There are things you can't show, of course, because of budgetary limitations, but in general, both of these movies create their worlds wonderfully and are to be admired for that. And if it were possible, I don't know whether it is, it'd be really groovy if someone like Imprint or Umbrella put out a double feature box set of these two movies with a lot of ancillary material. I think that they would sell really well. And those of us who have seen these movies, on VHS, for instance, or maybe on a streaming service, would appreciate having a physical copy of them. So again, as I said, these two movies, of course, are comfort horror movies. They are both horror, and they've both got malevolent magicians in them. They're also humorous, and they've got actors in it that we like and who do the job well. And I love that aesthetic of the 1990s where Beat Pictures went to town with the concepts that they gave us in cinema. And both of these movies do that really well. So HBO should release them as a box set. Put them on Blu-ray. I don't think it needs a 4K upgrade. I don't necessarily think that the media they were filmed on would support 4K, but they may well do. Who knows? Either way, these movies should be re-released on physical media, even though I do appreciate the fact that I have my Mexican copy of Castle Deadly Spell. So that's it for this time around. Thanks a lot for watching. Usual things, please like, subscribe, leave a comment, let me know what you think of these movies. And let me know if there are any other urban fantasy films that you really appreciate and like, that build their worlds in a really positive way. Next up, as I said, I'm going to be reviewing Terrifier 3, which I saw in the cinema, and for which I was given a mask of Art the Clown. Interesting film, and it's doing crazy well at the box office. It's made over $1 million in the Australian box office alone, and it was the best-selling movie at the box office last weekend in America. And so the movie is making crazy good money. So until all of that happens, and I'm going to try to find something to match with that, until I review that, watch some good movies, watch some bad movies, watch some magical movies, and I'll catch you next time.